in the circle. Simple. He makes so many of them.
Take the kid! He's on!
По сторонам, легче направо. Но, обязательно, точно.
We stay here.
Мы должны... Держи курс на север. Вниз, наконец.
cover you, see if there's any more left.
Paso! Drop that weapon! I wish to see the...
John Rambo has finally found a fragile peace in a quiet Thai monastery, but is pulled violently back into the flames of war when his former commander and surrogate father, Colonel Troutman, is captured by a ruthless Soviet commander in Afghanistan. Driven by unyielding loyalty, Rambo embarks on a solitary rescue mission, allying with local rebels to wage a one-man war against a heavily armed superpower. The sweltering heat of Thailand presses down like a physical weight in the opening moments of our story. We find ourselves in a crowded, humid warehouse where the air is thick with the smell of sweat and the deafening roar of a betting crowd. In the center of a makeshift ring, two men are engaged in a brutal and blistering match of stick fighting. The crack of heavy bamboo echoes through the room with every strike. One of these fighters is a man whose face is hidden by the shadows and his long dark hair, but we know exactly who it is. John Rambo has traded the jungles of Vietnam and the forests of the Pacific Northwest for the underground fighting circuits of Bangkok. He moves with a terrifying mechanical precision. His opponent swings wildly with the desperation of a man who realizes he is totally outmatched. Rambo deflects a crushing blow with the metallic clang of thick wood hitting thick wood, and then strikes back with a calculated bone-rattling force. The crowd screams as Rambo easily takes the victory. You would think a guy who has practically fought entire wars by himself would maybe take up knitting or gardening in his retirement, but apparently underground stick fighting is the only way he can burn off his endless supply of adrenaline. He collects his winnings in silence, never acknowledging the cheers or the money-changing hands around him. His face is an unreadable mask of stoicism. We soon learn why he is participating in these violent spectacles. He takes his blood money and brings it directly to a serene, beautifully constructed Buddhist temple nestled in the lush green mountains. Rambo is not fighting for greed or glory. He is fighting to fund the monks and to help rebuild their sacred sanctuary. He has literally become a monk in training, seeking a spiritual cleansing for a soul that has been stained by decades of continuous violence. The juxtaposition is striking. We see this legendary killing machine calmly laying bricks and spreading mortar beneath the golden statues of Buddha. He is trying so hard to build something rather than destroy it. The coarse texture of the bricks in his hands seems to ground him, giving him a singular, peaceful purpose. But the universe is a cruel writer of destinies, and it simply cannot allow a warrior of his caliber to find lasting tranquility. The quiet chanting of the monks is abruptly interrupted by the crunch of heavy tires on gravel. a military jeep pulls up to the temple grounds, shattering the peaceful illusion Rambo has worked so hard to maintain. Out steps Colonel Samuel Troutman, looking as crisp and authoritative as ever, alongside an embassy official named Robert Griggs. Troutman is the closest thing Rambo has to a father. He is the man who created the soldier, the man who trained him, and the man who has repeatedly dragged him out of the fire. The emotional weight of their reunion is heavy in the humid air. They walk together through the unfinished temple, and you can almost hear the unsaid words passing between them. Troutman looks at Rambo not just as a former asset, but as a deeply broken son who has finally found a quiet corner of the world to heal. But Troutman is a soldier first, and he has come with a mission. He explains the dire situation unfolding in Afghanistan, where the local Mujahideen fighters are being decimated by the technologically superior and utterly ruthless Soviet military. Troutman has been tasked with delivering highly classified Stinger missiles to the rebels to help them combat the devastating Soviet helicopter gunships. He needs Rambo. He needs the ultimate survivor to guide him through the treacherous terrain and ensure the weapons reach their destination. Rambo listens to the pitch with his jaw set firmly. The gentle breeze rustles his hair as he stares out over the peaceful valley. Every fiber of his being remembers the horrors of war. The deafening silence after an explosion, the metallic tang of blood in his mouth, the ghosts of his fallen comrades. He turns to Troutman and politely but firmly declines. He tells his old commander that his war is over. He has spent his entire life fighting other people's battles, and he is finally done. Troutman tries to push, reminding Rambo that he cannot deny what he truly is. Troutman drops a heavy philosophical line about how sculptors make sculptures and warriors make war. It is a harsh reality check, suggesting that Rambo is denying his own fundamental nature. But Rambo holds his ground. He watches Troutman and Griggs drive away, leaving a cloud of dust that slowly settles over the temple. You can see the conflict in his eyes. He is trying to convince himself that he made the right choice, but the shadow of guilt is already creeping into his heart. Meanwhile, halfway across the world, the dusty, arid mountains of Afghanistan provide a stark contrast to the lush greenery of Thailand. Troutman and his convoy are making their way through a treacherous mountain pass under the cover of darkness. The night air is freezing, and the tension among the soldiers is palpable. Suddenly, the silence is shattered by the terrifying mechanical shriek of incoming Soviet Hind helicopters. These gunships are flying tanks, and they descend upon the convoy with absolute fury. The night sky is illuminated by the bright, deadly flashes of heavy machine gun fire and explosive rockets. The deafening roar of the weapons tears through the convoy, obliterating the transport trucks. Vehicles explode in massive fireballs, sending twisted metal and jagged shrapnel flying in every direction. Troutman screams orders over the chaotic din, trying to organize a defense, but it is a hopeless endeavor. The sheer, overwhelming firepower of the Soviet ambush leaves the convoy completely defenseless. Troutman is quickly surrounded by heavily armed Spetsnaz commandos. Out of the darkness emerges Colonel Zaysin, the ruthless Soviet commander tasked with crushing the local rebellion. Zaysin looks down at Troutman with a cold, calculated arrogance. He is a man who clearly enjoys his brutal work. Troutman is captured, his men are dead, and the mission is a catastrophic failure.
Back in Thailand, the peaceful routine of temple building is broken once again. This time, it is only Griggs who arrives at the monastery. The look on the official's face tells Rambo everything he needs to know before a single word is spoken. Griggs informs Rambo that Troutman has been captured by Soviet forces and is being held in an impenetrable fortress deep within hostile territory. Griggs explains that the United States government cannot officially sanction a rescue mission because it would cause an international incident. Troutman is essentially on his own, abandoned by the military bureaucracy he dedicated his life to serving. As Griggs speaks, you can see the emotional transformation washing over Rambo. The peaceful monk vanishes, and the deadly soldier awakens from his slumber. The realization that his surrogate father is facing torture and execution at the hands of a sadistic enemy is the only catalyst required to break his vow of nonviolence. Rambo does not say much. He does not need to. his silence is louder than any dramatic speech. He simply turns away, leaving his bricks and his mortar behind. The universe called his bluff, and Rambo is answering. The preparation sequence is a masterclass in building tension. Rambo travels to the bustling, chaotic city of Peshawar, Pakistan, near the Afghan border. The transition from the serene temple to this loud, crowded marketplace is jarring. The air here is filled with the shouts of merchants, the bleating of livestock, and the sharp scent of spices and exhaust fumes. Rambo navigates through the crowded streets with a focused intensity. He meets with an arms dealer named Musa, who is supposed to be his contact and guide. Musa is initially highly skeptical of this quiet, brooding American. He looks at Rambo and sees a solitary man who stands no chance against the might of the Soviet army. Musa tries to explain the sheer scale of the danger, telling Rambo that the Soviet fort is a heavily fortified death trap. But Rambo stares right through him with a gaze so cold it could freeze water in the desert. He simply demands to be taken to the border. Musa, realizing the absolute futility of arguing with a human bulldozer, reluctantly agrees to help him secure supplies.
They visit a local underground weapons market. The scene is a sensory overload of metallic clatter and the smell of gun oil. Rambo meticulously inspects his gear. Every click of a rifle bolt, every snap of a magazine is a familiar, comforting sound to him. But the most iconic moment of his preparation comes when he decides he needs a new combat knife. He does not just buy one off a shelf, he forges it himself. We are treated to an intensely atmospheric scene of Rambo working over a blazing hot forge. The heat radiating from the coals is practically visible through the screen. He pounds the glowing red steel with heavy rhythmic strikes of a massive hammer. Sparks fly into the dark room, illuminating his focused, sweating face. The metallic ring of the hammer on the anvil is a steady heartbeat of impending doom for the Soviet army. He grinds the blade, sharpening it until the edge gleams with a deadly precision. This forging scene is deeply symbolic. Rambo is not just making a weapon, he is reforging himself, shedding the peaceful exterior and hardening his soul for the brutal violence ahead. Armed to the teeth and carrying a bow with explosive arrows that seem to violate several laws of physics, Rambo and Musa begin their treacherous trek across the border into Afghanistan. The landscape is breathtakingly beautiful, but utterly unforgiving. Vast stretches of golden sand dunes give way to jagged rocky mountains. The sun beats down mercilessly, baking the earth beneath their horses' hooves. The wind howls across the open plains, carrying stinging sand that bites at their exposed skin. During this long journey, Musa tries to understand the silent American riding next to him. They have conversations about the nature of the conflict. Musa explains the deep spiritual and cultural motivations of the Mujahideen fighters. He tells Rambo that they are fighting for their homes, their families, and their fundamental right to exist without oppression. They believe it is a holy war, a battle of sheer willpower against mechanical superiority. Rambo listens intently. This resonates deeply with him, because he is a man without a home, a man who has fought for politicians who never cared about him. Hearing about people fighting for something pure and personal strikes a chord in his hardened heart. He begins to see the Afghan fighters, not just as allies of convenience, but as kindred spirits in the universal struggle against tyranny.
They eventually arrive at a remote mountain village hidden within a deep, rocky valley. The village is a bustling hub of resistance fighters, families, and refugees. Rambo is introduced to Masood, the charismatic and deeply respected leader of the local Mujahideen. Masood is a man who carries the weight of his people's suffering with a quiet, dignified strength. He welcomes Rambo, but expresses the same skepticism as Musa. He questions whether one man can truly make a difference against the massive Soviet war machine. Rambo responds with his trademark brevity, essentially stating that he is not there to save the country, he is just there for his friend. Despite the heavy circumstances, the village tries to maintain a sense of normal life. They engage in a traditional and incredibly violent horseback game called buzkashi, which involves wrestling over a dead goat carcass. Rambo watches the chaotic, dusty spectacle with a rare, faint smile.
recognizing the raw warrior spirit in these people. He even participates momentarily, showing off his exceptional riding skills and earning a small measure of respect from the fiercely proud Afghan fighters. But the brief moment of cultural exchange is shattered in the most terrifying way imaginable. The faint, rhythmic thudding of helicopter blades echoes through the valley. It starts as a distant hum and quickly builds into a deafening roar. The villagers immediately panic, recognizing the sound of death approaching from the sky. Soviet Hind gunships crest the mountain ridges, descending on the defenseless village like mechanical birds of prey. The ensuing attack is an absolute nightmare of sensory overload. The choppers unleash a torrent of heavy machine gun fire that tears through the fragile mud brick houses. The explosive rockets detonate with earth-shattering force, sending massive plumes of dust and debris into the air. The screams of terrified women and children are barely audible over the relentless explosions. Rambo goes into pure survival mode. He dives through the chaos, grabbing a heavy anti-aircraft machine gun mounted on a truck. He grips the handles and unleashes a furious stream of return fire. The metallic clatter of the heavy gun is deafening as empty brass casings rain down around him. He manages to damage one of the helicopters, forcing it to retreat. But the devastation to the village is absolute.
When the dust finally settles, the aftermath is heartbreaking. The once vibrant village is reduced to smoldering rubble. Wounded fighters and crying children are scattered among the ruins. The smell of burning wood and scorched earth is sickeningly thick in the air. Rambo walks through the destruction, his face smeared with dirt and blood. He sees a young boy named Hamid, who had been following him around with a look of pure hero worship, now crying over the ruins. Rambo realizes that his presence has brought the wrath of the Soviet army down upon these innocent people. The guilt hits him hard. He refuses to let the Mujahideen risk any more lives for his personal mission. He tells Massoud that he is going to the Soviet fort alone. It is a completely suicidal plan, but Rambo delivers the line with such absolute conviction that nobody even bothers to argue with him. Soviet commanders in the 1980s apparently went to a special academy that only taught them how to look incredibly smug while wearing immaculate uniforms, but they are about to learn a very hard lesson about poking sleeping bears. Despite Rambo's insistence on going alone, Musa and the young boy Hamid secretly follow him. You really have to question the parenting standards of the 1980s when a 10-year-old kid is allowed to casually tag along on a one-man assault against a heavily fortified Soviet military base, but we just roll with it. The trio approaches the massive stone fortress under the cover of a pitch-black night. The fort sits entirely isolated in a vast, flat plain, surrounded by layers of barbed wire, watchtowers, and deadly minefields. Rambo navigates the perimeter with the silent grace of a ghost. He uses a knife to gently probe the dirt, feeling for the hidden pressure plates of landmines. The tension is almost unbearable. Every single footstep could result in a blinding explosion. He cuts through the thick wire fences with a sharp metallic snip that seems way too loud in the dead silence of the night. He motions for Musa and Hamid to stay back while he infiltrates the inner walls.
Inside the fortress, the atmosphere is oppressive and cold. We cut to the interrogation room, where Colonel Zayson is attempting to break Colonel Troutman. The psychological warfare between the two men is intense. Zayson paces the room, his boots clicking sharply on the concrete floor. He delivers long, grandstanding monologues about the inevitability of Soviet victory and the futility of American resistance. He uses a variety of brutal torture methods, trying to force Troutman to reveal the location of the Stinger missiles. But Troutman is practically made of iron. He absorbs the physical pain with gritted teeth and stares back at Zayson with pure, unadulterated defiance. Troutman even manages to deliver some incredibly sharp, sarcastic remarks, telling Zayson that the only thing the Soviets are going to win is a one-way ticket to a very deep grave.
The bond between Troutman and Rambo is clearly built on a shared foundation of absolute stubbornness. Zayson grows increasingly frustrated, his smug demeanor cracking as he realizes he cannot break the American colonel. While Troutman is enduring literal torture, Rambo is busy reducing the Soviet Guard population one silent kill at a time. He moves through the dark corridors of the fort like a supernatural entity. A guard turns a corner, and before he can even register the shadow moving toward him, Rambo's massive hand clamps over his mouth. A swift, brutal twist, and the sickening crack of a broken neck echoes faintly, before the body is gently lowered to the ground. Rambo relies entirely on stealth, using his knife and his bare hands to clear a path toward the detention block. The sensory details here are chilling. The soft scrape of Rambo's boots, the muffled gasps of the dying guards, the heavy breathing of a man operating at peak lethal efficiency. He finally locates the area where Troutman is being held. He peers through a grated window and sees his mentor, battered and bleeding, tied to a chair. The sight fills Rambo with a cold, righteous fury.
But before Rambo can initiate the rescue, things go spectacularly wrong. Hamid, who apparently did not understand the concept of staying put, has wandered into the fort and accidentally alerted a patrol. Gunfire erupts, shattering the silence of the night. Rambo is instantly forced to abandon his stealth approach and go loud. He pulls out his assault rifle and begins blasting his way through the corridors. The deafening roar of automatic weapons fills the narrow concrete halls. Muzzle flashes light up the darkness like strobe lights. Bullets chip away at the stone walls, sending sharp fragments of rock flying everywhere. Rambo fights desperately to reach Hamid, who has been cornered by Soviet troops. In the chaotic shootout, Hamid takes a bullet to the leg, screaming in pain. Rambo dives across the hallway, laying down a wall of suppressive fire to protect the kid. During the frantic escape, Rambo himself takes a nasty hit. A piece of jagged wooden shrapnel from an exploding doorframe embeds itself deeply into his side. He grunts in agony but barely breaks his stride. Knowing that the element of surprise is gone and the entire base is now swarming with heavily armed soldiers, Rambo makes the brutal tactical decision to abort the rescue. He grabs Hamid and regroups with Musa, fighting their way back out through the perimeter wire while alarms blare endlessly into the night. They escape into the pitch-black desert, seeking shelter in a series of deep, rocky caves. Once they are relatively safe, Rambo addresses his gruesome injury. This leads us to one of the most famously intense and medically unadvisable scenes in action movie history. Rambo examines the bloody wooden stake protruding from his side. His face is a mask of pure, concentrated pain. He breaks the wood off, leaving a piece still buried deep in his flesh. Then he does the unthinkable. He takes the bullet from his rifle, uses his knife to pry the bullet from the casing, and pours the raw black gunpowder directly into his open, bleeding wound. The metallic clinking of the bullet casing, the soft pouring sound of the powder, and Rambo's heavy, ragged breathing create an incredibly tense auditory experience. He strikes a match and touches it to the powder. The resulting flash of fire and the sickening crackle of burning flesh are enough to make anyone squirm. Rambo screams, a raw, guttural sound of pure agony as the intense heat instantly cauterizes the wound. It is a terrible medical practice, absolutely not endorsed by any healthcare professional, but it perfectly illustrates the inhuman pain tolerance and raw survival instinct of John Rambo.
The next morning, the harsh desert sun reveals a haggard but fiercely determined Rambo. He knows he cannot bring Musa and the injured Hamid back into the meat grinder. He firmly orders them to return to the village and leave the country. He watches them leave, ensuring they are safe, before he turns his attention back to the massive fortress. The first attempt was about stealth. The second attempt is going to be about pure, unalterated chaos. Rambo knows that creeping around in the dark did not work, so he decides to approach the problem with a significantly louder strategy. He observes a Soviet transport helicopter preparing to land near the fort. With the speed and ferocity of a wild animal, he ambushes the landing zone. He eliminates the perimeter guards with terrifying efficiency, his assault rifle barking loud and clear in the bright daylight.
He sprints toward the chopper, firing on the run, his long hair whipping in the wind generated by the massive rotor blades. Inside the fortress, Zayson is furious about the nighttime breach. He has doubled the guards and is preparing to transport Troutman to a more secure location for further interrogation. He drags the beaten and bloody Troutman out of his cell, mocking him one last time. But Zayson's arrogant gloating is suddenly interrupted by the sound of the transport helicopter lifting off the pad. Zayson looks up, expecting to see his own pilots, but instead he sees the furious, scarred face of John Rambo at the controls. Rambo has hijacked the massive machine and is bringing it directly toward the inner courtyard. The sheer audacity of the move leaves the Soviet soldiers momentarily paralyzed. Rambo unleashes the helicopter's heavy weapon systems, raining explosive fire down onto the courtyard. The deafening explosions tear through the guard towers, sending concrete and bodies flying into the air. In the midst of the chaotic bombardment, Rambo lowers the chopper just enough to allow Troutman a chance to escape. Troutman, despite his severe injuries, finds a surge of adrenaline. He breaks away from his captors, grabbing a discarded weapon and fighting his way toward the hovering helicopter. The reunion between the two men is forged in absolute fire. Troutman dives into the open door of the chopper as bullets ping harmlessly off the armored hull. Rambo pulls back on the stick, and the massive machine ascends rapidly, leaving the burning courtyard behind. Inside the noisy, vibrating cabin, Troutman looks at his former student, breathless and bleeding but smiling. He says a simple "thank you," acknowledging the impossible feat Rambo just accomplished. Rambo replies with a classic deadpan delivery, simply stating that he was in the neighborhood. It is a moment of pure action movie brotherhood, a brief pause of sarcastic levity in the middle of a war zone.
But the escape is far from over. Zayson is practically foaming at the mouth with rage. He scrambles his elite Spetsnaz commando units and jumps into his personal Hind gunship, the flying tank that has been terrifying the countryside. He takes off in hot pursuit of the stolen transport chopper. What follows is a tense and desperately uneven aerial dogfight. Rambo's transport helicopter is sluggish and unarmed for air-to-air combat, while Zayson's Hind is a predator loaded with rockets and heavy cannons. Zayson relentlessly hounds them through the narrow, jagged mountain canyons. The sound of the chase is incredible. The distinct heavy thudding of the Hind's rotors contrasts with the frantic whining of Rambo's strained engines. Zayson fires a volley of rockets. Rambo desperately banks the heavy machine, dodging the missiles by mere inches. The explosions shatter the canyon walls, sending avalanches of sharp rocks tumbling down. Eventually, the superior firepower wins out. The Hind lands a glancing blow on the tail rotor of the transport chopper. The machine shudders violently, spinning out of control. Alarms scream in the cockpit as Rambo fights the controls, trying to execute a crash landing on a high, desolate plateau. The impact is brutal, tearing the landing gear off and sending the helicopter skidding across the dirt in a shower of sparks and dust. Rambo and Troutman barely survive the crash. They crawl out of the smoking wreckage just as Zayson's Hind circles back for the finishing blow. They sprint across the rocky terrain, diving into a narrow crevice just as a barrage of heavy explosive rounds obliterates the remains of their crashed chopper. They find themselves at the entrance to a massive subterranean cave network. It is their only option for cover, so they plunge into the pitch-black depths of the earth. The transition from the blinding desert sun to the claustrophobic darkness of the caves is chilling. The air inside is cold and damp, and the only sound is the echo of their heavy boots on the loose stones. Zayson, furious that they survived the crash, deploys a massive squad of highly trained Spetsnaz commandos into the caves to hunt them down. The cave sequence is a masterclass in tension and claustrophobic horror. Rambo and Troutman are severely outgunned, outmanned, and trapped in an unfamiliar maze. But Rambo is in his absolute element. He is a master of asymmetric warfare, a ghost who thrives in the shadows. He tells Troutman to keep moving while he drops back to set traps. The Spetsnaz soldiers, wearing night vision goggles and heavily armored, sweep through the tunnels with terrifying precision. Their flashlights cut through the darkness, creating long, menacing shadows on the jagged cave walls. But they are hunting a predator that is infinitely more dangerous than they are. Rambo uses the environment perfectly. He drops from the ceiling, taking out a soldier with a silent thrust of his forged knife. He drags bodies into the shadows before their comrades even notice they are missing.
The tension builds to an almost unbearable degree as the soldiers realize they are being picked off one by one in the dark. Troutman, proving that he is not just an old guy who gives speeches, also gets in on the action. He manages to ambush a guard, securing a heavy assault rifle and engaging in a brutal close-quarters firefight. The enclosed space of the cave makes the gunfire incredibly loud. The muzzle flashes temporarily blind everyone, and the echoes of the gunshots sound like rolling thunder. But the climax of the cave sequence belongs to Rambo and his utterly ridiculous but undeniably awesome explosive arrows. Cornered by a squad of heavily armed troops led by a massive hulking Spetsnaz enforcer, Rambo draws back the string of his compound bow. The mechanical click of the explosive tip engaging is a sound that signifies pure impending doom. He releases the string, and the arrow flies through the dark tunnel with a sharp hiss. It strikes the massive soldier directly in the chest. For a split second, the soldier looks down in sheer confusion. Then the arrow detonates. The explosion in the confined space of the cave is absolutely massive. A shockwave of fire and concussive force throws the remaining soldiers backward, collapsing part of the tunnel and burying them under tons of solid rock. Rambo and Troutman barely escape the collapsing cavern, choking on thick clouds of gray dust.
They eventually find a small crack of daylight and force their way out of this suffocating darkness. They emerge battered, exhausted, and covered in a thick layer of cave dirt onto a vast, open desert plain. The blinding sunlight forces them to squint. They take a moment to catch their breath, thinking they have finally escaped the immediate danger. But as the dust clears from their eyes, they look out across the flat expanse of the desert, and their hearts collectively sink. Lined up on the horizon, stretching as far as the eye can see, is the entire motorized might of the Soviet Regional Army. Dozens of heavy tanks, armored personnel carriers, and hundreds of infantry soldiers stand between them and the Pakistani border. The mechanical rumble of the idling diesel engines shakes the very ground beneath their feet. It is an image of absolute hopelessness. Two exhausted, wounded men, armed with stolen rifles, facing down an entire mechanized battalion. Colonel Zayson, hovering safely above the army in his fearsome Hind helicopter, uses an external loudspeaker to deliver his final arrogant ultimatum. His voice echoes across the desert, demanding their immediate and unconditional surrender. He assures them that they have no chance of survival and that their resistance is a pointless waste of life. Troutman looks at the massive army and then looks at Rambo. The exhaustion in Troutman's eyes is evident, but his spirit remains unbroken. He asks Rambo what they should do. Rambo stares at the wall of armored steel and artillery. He does not calculate the odds. He does not look for a diplomatic solution. He simply tightens his grip on his rifle and delivers a line that perfectly encapsulates his entire existence. He suggests that they should just surround them. It is a moment of such pure, absurd bravado that you cannot help but smile. The two men, alone against the world, chamber their weapons and prepare to make a final suicidal stand. They are ready to die on their feet rather than surrender on their knees.
They step out from the rocks and begin walking slowly toward the massive army. The Soviet soldiers raise their weapons, waiting for the order to fire. Zayson smiles a cruel, victorious smile and reaches for the firing controls of his helicopter. But before the first shot can be fired, the ground begins to tremble. It is not the mechanical vibration of tanks, but the rhythmic thundering drumbeat of hundreds of horses. Rambo and Troutman look to their flank and witness an absolute cinematic miracle. Cresting the desert dunes, charging over the horizon with swords drawn and rifles raised, is a massive army of Mujahideen warriors. Massoud and his fighters have rallied every available man in the region, and they are charging headlong into the teeth of the Soviet war machine. It is a gloriously chaotic clash of eras. Men on horseback, screaming battle cries,
charging directly at modern, heavily armored tanks. The sheer bravery and cinematic willpower required for horses to take on tanks and somehow stand a chance is staggering, but in the world of 1980s action movies, it works perfectly. The battlefield erupts into an absolute frenzy of dust, fire, and screaming metal. Rambo and Troutman use the sudden chaos to break into a full sprint. They dive into the fray, fighting alongside the rebel cavalry. The sensory overload of this final battle is incredible. The heavy booming of tank cannons, the rapid chattering of machine guns, the frantic whinnying of horses, and the concussive shockwaves of exploding mortar rounds blend into a symphony of pure destruction. The desert sand is kicked up into a massive blinding cloud, reducing visibility to mere feet. Rambo spots an abandoned Soviet tank whose crew was killed by the initial rebel charge. Without hesitation, he leaps onto the heavy armor, opens the top hatch, and drops into the driver's seat. He figures out the heavy mechanical controls with pure instinct, slamming the heavy steel gears into place. The massive tank lurches forward, crushing everything in its path.
Zayson, realizing that his guaranteed victory is rapidly turning into a humiliating defeat, focuses all of his rage entirely on Rambo. He spots the rogue tank tearing through his lines and dips the nose of his hind gunship toward the ground. He unleashes a relentless barrage of rockets and heavy cannon fire, tearing up the earth around the tank. Rambo, maneuvering the massive, sluggish beast, desperately tries to bring his main gun to bear on the incredibly fast-moving helicopter. It is a literal game of chicken between a 70-ton piece of ground armor and a heavily armed flying gunship. The dust swirls around them as they lock eyes across the chaotic battlefield. Zayson is screaming in fury, his finger holding down the firing triggers. Rambo is completely silent, his eyes narrowed in pure lethal focus. They are charging directly at each other, closing the distance at terrifying speed. Zayson fires everything he has, but the tank's thick armor absorbs the glancing blows. Rambo waits for the perfect microsecond. He waits until the helicopter is practically right on top of him, filling his entire field of vision with spinning blades and screaming engines. He pulls the firing mechanism for the main cannon. The resulting explosion is practically apocalyptic. The heavy tank shell strikes the hind directly in the cockpit, tearing through the armored glass and detonating the fuel reserves. Zayson's smug arrogance is instantly vaporized in a massive, blinding ball of orange fire. The burning wreckage of the massive helicopter crashes violently into the ground, directly in front of the tank, sending a massive shockwave of heat and debris washing over the battlefield. The impact is so severe that it disables Rambo's tank, leaving him shaken and bleeding inside the cramped metal cabin. But the destruction of their commander and his invincible gunship completely breaks the morale of the remaining Soviet forces. Seeing their leader obliterated, the surviving soldiers begin a frantic and disorganized retreat, abandoning their vehicles and fleeing back into the desert. The battle is over. The impossible has been achieved. The dust slowly begins to settle over the scorched and cratered landscape. The silence that follows the deafening roar of the battle is almost heavier than the noise itself. Rambo pushes open the heavy metal hatch of the damaged tank and pulls himself out into the bright sunlight. He is exhausted, battered, completely covered in a thick layer of dirt and dried blood, but he is alive. He looks around at the victorious Mujahideen fighters who are cheering and celebrating their miraculous victory over the invaders. Troutman walks over to the tank, leaning heavily on a discarded rifle for support. He looks up at Rambo, an expression of profound respect and unspoken relief on his weathered face. They do not embrace, they do not exchange tearful monologues. They simply share a look of mutual understanding, acknowledging the absolute hell they just walked through together. Before they leave, Rambo finds Masood and the young boy Hamid. The boy, injured but beaming with pride, looks at Rambo not just as a hero, but as a legend made flesh. Rambo reaches into his pocket and pulls out the beautiful amulet that he had carried with him from Thailand, a symbol of the peace he was trying to find.
He places it gently in Hamid's hands, passing on a piece of his own hope to the next generation. It is a quiet, deeply emotional gesture from a man who usually speaks only with weapons. He turns away, mounting a jeep with Troutman. As they drive away toward the Pakistani border, Troutman looks at Rambo and asks him where they should go next. Rambo, staring out at the vast open horizon, replies with a sense of weary acceptance. He does not know where he is going, but he knows who he is. The journey back to the monastery seems like a distant dream now. The universe demanded a warrior, and John Rambo, as always, delivered. As the dust finally settles over the Afghan desert, we are left to ponder the tragic and unending cycle of conflict. John Rambo represents the universal soldier, a man forever burdened by the ghosts of his past and the lethal skills he cannot unlearn. His journey reminds us that while wars are fought on grand scales by powerful nations, the true cost is always paid in human blood and broken souls. Rambo fights not for ideologies, but for loyalty and love fiercely endure. This movie perfectly encapsulates the sheer bombastic spectacle of 1980s action cinema while anchoring its explosions in a surprisingly heartfelt story about surrogate fatherhood. It is a loud, chaotic ride that never forgets the emotional core of its bruised protagonist. What do you think would have finally given a man like Rambo true, lasting peace?